My name is Ava Collins, and for most of my life, I thought silence was safer than speaking up. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood in Colorado Springs where the lawns were trimmed perfectly. The neighbors waved politely, and the rules were never meant to be broken. But no one enforced those rules harder than my father, Victor Collins, ex-Marine, now a high school principal. He believed in structure, discipline, and results. Not feelings, not dreams, just results. In his world, kids didn't become artists, or inventors, or, God forbid, startups. They became doctors, soldiers, or lawyers. Respectable careers, he called them. Careers you could salute. Before we get into the sweet part, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you're watching us for the first time, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you never miss any new story. I wasn't born rebellious. I followed every rule for years. I got good grades, I showed up on time. I answered yes, sir, to everything. But something inside me always wanted more. Not more money, not more attention. Just more freedom, more space to create. At 12, I built my first robot from a broken RC car and some kitchen spoons. It couldn't do much, just roll forward and wave a spoon like a drunk flag, but I loved it. I showed it to Dad. He looked at it for 2 seconds, then went back to reading the newspaper. That's nice. Now go study your pre-algebra. The real world doesn't run on toys. That became the theme of our relationship. When I was 15, I started making extra money fixing neighbors' smart devices, doorbell cameras, thermostats, even drones. I once made $200 in a weekend helping a local shop fix their automated checkout system. I thought Dad would be impressed. Instead, he sat me down at the kitchen table, his face tight. You've had your fun, but no more side gigs. You need to focus on your SATs. You're applying to West Point next year, just like we planned. I didn't argue that night. I just nodded. But inside, something cracked, and that crack started growing. By my senior year, I had built an entire AI home security system using open source code, Raspberry Pi units, and motion sensors. I even had a name for it, Silent Guard. My small YouTube channel showed how it worked, and slowly, people started noticing. One morning, I woke up to an email from a local tech business incubator. We'd like to meet, interested in mentoring you for funding. I stared at that email for 10 minutes. My hands were shaking. This was real. Someone saw me. Someone outside this house believed in me. I waited until dinner to share the news. Dad was slicing meatloaf while the TV played quietly in the background. Mom passed him the peas and said, Ava, tell him about your little gadget. I hesitated. Then I said it. I'm not applying to West Point. I've decided to start a tech company. The room went still. My father looked up slowly. He put his fork down carefully. Then he stood up. His voice was low at first, like thunder rumbling far away. You're joking. I shook my head. No. I already have 2 beta testers, and, before I could finish, he slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. No, not under this roof. You want to waste your life chasing some fantasy. Fine, but don't do it here. I opened my mouth, but he cut me off. You want to be a YouTuber? A hacker? A dropout? Get out. Then he did something that still stings to this day. He walked over to my room, opened my laptop, and deleted my hard drives, everything. Years of code, research notes, videos, gone in one click. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just walked into my room, packed what I could into 2 duffel bags, grabbed my backup SSD hidden in a shoebox under my bed, and walked out of the house. No one stopped me. No one said goodbye. I spent the first night on a friend's couch. Then another. Then another. After a week, I found a cheap room for rent in the back of a retired mechanic's shop. It smelled like oil and coffee. There were spiders in the shower, but it was mine. I used the backup SSD to recover pieces of my work. Some files were damaged, some gone forever, but I didn't give up. I found free Wi-Fi at a diner and spent hours recoding the Silent Guard prototype. I couldn't afford food some days, but I had batteries. And hope. The hardest part wasn't sleeping on a cot. It wasn't skipping meals. It was realizing I had no one to call. Dad had blocked my number. Mom sent a single text, "Don't throw your life away." Then nothing. But late one night, while staring at the ceiling fan spin above me, I made myself a promise. I will never ask them for anything again. Not money, not support, not approval, nothing. If I was going to make it, it would be on my own terms. 2 weeks later, I walked into a local tech startup meet. My shoes had holes. My hoodie was stained. I was terrified, but I stood up in front of 15 strangers and pitched my project. Hi, I'm Ava. I built an AI security bot that learns motion patterns and detects threats more accurately than traditional home systems. I need mentorship and maybe a little faith. A man named Eli Navarro walked up to me afterward. He handed me a business card that simply said, "Solve problems, not noise." He said, "I've been waiting to meet someone like you." That night, for the first time since I left home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not comfort, not success, just seen. And that was enough to keep going. A week after the confrontation with my dad, I moved into the only space I could afford, Eli Navarro's cousin's garage. It wasn't glamorous or even truly livable. The floor was bare concrete, the walls unfinished, and the only source of light was a single dangling bulb that flickered like it had a secret to tell. There was no insulation, no bathroom, and no bed. Just a rusty tool cabinet, some forgotten furniture, and enough silence to think. But to me, that silence meant opportunity. I built a makeshift desk from old cardboard boxes, propped up my second-hand laptop on a stack of dusty textbooks someone left behind, and unrolled a yoga mat on the floor to serve as my bed. It was brutal, uncomfortable, and barely functional. But it had electricity, quiet, and the one thing I needed most, a place to build something from scratch. Eli would visit every now and then, never staying too long, never asking how I was doing. In the typical way, instead, each time he'd ask the same question, "What are you solving today?" At first, I thought it was a weird way to check in, but over time, I realized that question said more about him and about me than anything else. He didn't care about comfort. He cared about momentum. Was I still pushing? Was I still building? Was I still chasing the vision I believed in? Every time I gave him an answer, even if it was small, bug fixes, database optimization, interface, design, he'd nod, smirk, and leave. It annoyed me at first. Eventually, it became a lifeline. I started emailing local businesses relentlessly. Tech shops, secondhand car dealerships, mom-pop stores, offering them an affordable AI security monitoring system I now called Crow. The name came to me late one night while watching surveillance footage. The idea of a crow watching from above, sensing patterns and disturbances, seemed fitting. The system was learning from crowd behaviors, adapting to movement, and sending real-time alerts. I simplified the interface, cleaned up the branding, and focused on clarity over complexity. Out of every 50 emails I sent, maybe 1 or 2 people would reply, and even then, most wanted the system for free or were just curious. But I didn't stop. Each reply was a spark. Each maybe gave me just enough to keep going. My first breakthrough came in the most unexpected form. A pet store on Denver's north side. The owner, Marla, was an older woman with fire-red glasses and a gruff demeanor who ran the place with her rescued dog. "Beans," she called after finding one of my flyers, which I'd posted with a line that read, "Smarter than Ring, friendlier than Alexa." Her problem was simple. People kept stealing cat food and birdseed from the side entrance. She told me bluntly, "If your system can keep people from robbing me blind, I'll give you a shot." I rigged 2 used motion cameras, hooked up a Raspberry Pi running the AI model, and placed sensors near the storage area. 2 nights later, CrowSense pinged her phone at 1:43 a.m. A hoodie-wearing teenager had broken the latch and started swiping supplies. The system caught the anomaly, flagged it, and Marla called the cops. The thief was caught down the alley, still holding a bag of chew toys. When I returned the next day, Marla handed me $150 in wrinkled cash. I didn't know what to say. She just grunted and muttered, "You're weird, but you're onto something." That moment gave me the confidence I desperately needed. She told her friends, and slowly word began to spread. Within a few weeks, I had 6 businesses on free trial installs. One was a used car lot owned by a guy named Ron who'd been robbed twice in the past year. He was skeptical of anything involving AI or cloud stuff, but after Crows alerted him to 2 guys creeping through the lot after hours, he changed his mind. He handed me an envelope with $500 cash and told me, "You're saving me money. I didn't know I was losing." I stood there stunned, holding the envelope like it might catch fire. I wasn't doing the math in my head. I was trying not to cry. Spring crept in, the garage grew colder at night, and the air felt like breathing through steel wool. I bought a used space heater from a pawn shop that clicked constantly and smelled like burnt dust. Eli brought me a mini fridge without a word. I filled it with ramen, canned beans, and half-eaten burritos wrapped in foil. It wasn't luxury living, but in the context of my life, it felt like progress. Every day was a loop of coding, testing, debugging, and emailing. Sometimes I forgot to eat. I passed out once with the laptop still open on my chest and woke up 4 hours later with lines of code burned into my retinas, but I was getting better. The software was getting smarter. Then I hit a setback that shook me to my core. One of my trial clients, a downtown liquor store, got broken into and missed it. When I reviewed the footage, I found that the system had glitched, dropping a few key frames right as the suspect slipped through the back entrance. The detection system fired too late, 10 seconds too late. I met with the store owner expecting to be chewed out, but instead he looked me in the eye and simply said, "I liked your spirit, but it needs to work." That stung more than any insult could have. That night, I tore through the code for hours and rewrote the model's threshold logic. I didn't sleep. I was haunted by that 10-second failure. The next morning, I walked to the store unannounced and reinstalled the updated software without charging a dime. I didn't try to convince the owner. I just told him, "It's fixed. Try again." He said nothing at first, just nodded and let me leave. By late April, I had 11 paying clients, all small businesses, but all loyal, and vocal CrowSense was doing its job. That's when I got a call from someone I didn't expect, Leah Brighton, a real estate investor who had recently purchased 2 aging strip malls and was preparing for renovations. She said, "A friend of Marla's mentioned my name, and she was looking for gritty innovators who didn't sound like corporate sales bots." She came to the garage to see the system for herself. Instead of laughing at the cramped space or judging the yoga mat I used as a bed, she leaned against the wall, looked at my monitor, and asked me to walk her through it. I showed her the interface, explained the adaptive AI, and let her review the alert history. When I finished, she didn't hesitate. "I want 10 locations fitted with this 2-week deadline. Can you handle that?" My brain stumbled. I stammered something about bandwidth and time, but eventually forced out a yes. She smiled and said, "Good, send me a contract." I didn't have a contract. I Googled a free template, filled in what I could, and typed out a number that felt both bold and terrifying. $4,200 total, half up front. She paid within the hour. That moment felt surreal. I stared at the transaction confirmation like it might evaporate. That money meant real upgrades, new sensors, better hosting, a second-hand ergonomic chair instead of the one I'd salvaged from a dumpster, but more than that, it meant this was no longer a dream. CrowSense had its first official enterprise client. Leah's contract opened doors I never imagined. She referred me to another developer, then another. By early summer, I had 22 active installations and a workload too heavy to carry alone. I hired a part-time intern named Jonas, a college dropout with a fondness for root beer and an impressive command of Python. We worked back-to-back in the garage, wrapped in blankets, building and fixing and rewriting and dreaming. Jonas once asked, "What's the plan if this actually works?" I didn't know, but I liked that he asked. That question stuck with me. It echoed a few days later, when Eli stopped by again, this time leaning against the doorway with a grin. He saw the new gear, the messy stacks of invoices, the charts taped to the wall. Without looking away, he said, "Time to think bigger." When I asked what he meant, he simply said, "You're solving a real problem. Package it right. Stop selling it to people who tolerate it. Start selling it to people who need it." For the next week, I put the code on pause and studied business instead. I watched videos about startup scaling, read blogs about SaaS pricing, and rewrote CrowSense's entire mission statement. CrowSense helps property owners predict threats before they become problems. It was clear, sharp, and suddenly very real. Just days later, I received an email with a subject line I couldn't believe. Demo request, Norwalk Property Group. A security director named Kendra Dwyer had heard of CrowSense through a property manager I'd never met. She wrote, "We operate 47 locations across California and Arizona. We're reviewing new systems. A client mentioned CrowSense. Can you demo Thursday at 2 p.m.? My hands shook. I stared at the screen, then called Jonas. "Hope your keyboard's warm," I told him. "We're going big." The morning of the Norwalk Property Group pitch felt like the air was thinner than usual. I had barely slept the night before. Every part of me was buzzing. Nerves, excitement, fear, disbelief. I wasn't just demoing to a small mom-bop shop anymore. This was a regional property giant, responsible for millions in assets, with security contracts probably bigger than my entire life savings. Their properties stretched across cities, filled with parking lots, warehouses, high-end storage units, and strip malls that were frequent targets for theft. Getting their attention was one thing. Winning their business was a whole different game, but I couldn't afford to play small. Not now. I borrowed a collared shirt from Eli, one size too big, and printed makeshift business cards at a print shop down the street. Just my name, the CrowSense logo, and a slogan I'd come up with while brushing my teeth. Smarter security starts before the crime. Jonas helped me package the demo into a slick slideshow, motion detection stats, real-time alert examples, client success stories. I loaded everything onto a USB drive, backed it up to the cloud, and then backed that up again. I wasn't taking chances. I arrived at the Norwalk office 30 minutes early and sat in the parking lot rehearsing my introduction over and over. Until I could say it without sounding like a robot, the building itself was clean and modern, with minimalist glass panels and a sleek front desk that screamed, "We take ourselves seriously." The receptionist, a sharp woman with match red lipstick, asked who I was meeting. When I said Kendra Dwyer, she raised an eyebrow like she hadn't expected someone in thrift store shoes and a wrinkled shirt. But she didn't say anything. She just pointed to a row of chairs and told me to wait. Every minute that ticked by felt like an hour. I ran through every failure in my mind. What if the cameras glitched during the demo? What if I got a question I couldn't answer? What if she Googled me and found out I lived in a garage? Finally, Kendra walked in. She was tall, calm, and had the kind of presence that made everyone else in the room subconsciously sit up straighter. She shook my hand firmly and led me into a conference room lined with black leather chairs and a massive TV mounted on the wall. 2 other people joined us, someone from operations and another from facilities. They barely looked at me. I felt like a high school student trying to pitch a science project to NASA, but I reminded myself, I built this. I lived through nights without heat, lived on canned beans, rebuilt this system line by line. I belonged in that room. I started the pitch by telling them about Marla's pet shop, then the car lot, then Leah. I explained how CrowSense wasn't just another motion sensor system. It didn't just react, it learned. It understood traffic flow, time-based patterns, lighting changes, even how loiterers behave differently from someone taking a shortcut. I showed them how CrowSense could alert owners before suspicious behavior turned into a crime. I pulled up a live demo from a property still running my beta version. I explained how the system anonymized data to protect privacy but still flagged behavioral anomalies with stunning accuracy. For the first time in 20 minutes, Kendra leaned forward. She asked hard questions. How scalable is it? What's the hardware cost? What's the data retention policy? I answered each one with the best I had. Honest, clear, no fluff. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Kendra glanced at the others and said, "We've tried 6 other systems in the past year. Yours is the only one that doesn't sound like a copy of something else." Then she leaned back and added, "I want to run a pilot on 5 properties. 1 month. If it holds up, we'll talk statewide." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and forced out a yes. Absolutely. I'll send over the paperwork. This afternoon, back in the car, I didn't drive for 15 minutes. I just sat there, hands shaking, staring at the dashboard. 5 properties. A real shot. I called Jonas and screamed into the phone like we'd won the lottery. We hadn't made money yet, but we'd unlocked something bigger. Credibility. That night, I didn't sleep. I rewrote the install protocol, created new onboarding materials, even redesigned the CrowSense dashboard to make it simpler for clients with multiple locations. I wasn't just building for corner shops anymore. I was building for scale. By the end of the first week, all 5 Norwalk locations were running CrowSense. Jonas and I took turns troubleshooting, testing, and gathering data. I spent my days knee-deep in installations, my nights writing back-end scripts, and my early mornings crafting client reports. It was exhausting, but something amazing started to happen. The alerts were clean, no false alarms, real threats flagged. One property caught a man casing the lot 3 nights in a row. Another caught an attempted break-in at 3 a.m., and the police were called in time. After just 2 weeks, Kendra emailed, "These are the best results we've had in years. Let's meet." We sat down again, this time with her legal and procurement team. I was ready. I proposed a tiered licensing model. Flat monthly fees per property, with discounted rates for bulk installations. I offered support, training, data, reports. Kendra didn't blink. "We'll start with 25 properties," she said. 2-year contract, expandable. I did the math later. This contract alone would bring in 6 figures over the term. I wasn't ready to cry in front of them, so I just smiled and said, "Let's do it." Within days, I went from the guy sleeping on a yoga mat in a freezing garage to the founder of a real startup with a major contract. Eli came by that weekend and just stood at the garage entrance, arms crossed, nodding. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't need to. I told him I wanted to move out, finally find a real office, maybe even an apartment with heating and a bed that didn't deflate overnight. He laughed and said, "Just don't forget where the first server rack sat, next to a busted lawnmower and a jar of dead spiders." By the end of that month, I had incorporated CrowSense officially. We rented a tour room office on the east side of the city. It had windows, it had coffee, it had real chairs. Jonas brought in a lava lamp as some kind of joke, but we kept it. I hired 2 interns from the local university. I hired a part-time salesperson. It felt surreal. hearing other people talk about my company, referring to Crowsense like it was a household name. Then the local news called. Apparently someone at Norwalk had tipped off a reporter about our system catching multiple breaks. They wanted to do a feature on the scrappy startup, bringing AI-powered safety to small business owners. I didn't even think about it. I said yes. The news van pulled up outside our tiny office the next week. They filmed the dashboard, interviewed me against a backdrop of whiteboards covered in sticky notes, and asked the question I hadn't prepared for. What pushed you to build this in the first place? I paused. I thought about my dad's face, yelling in the kitchen. I thought about the silence of that garage. I thought about every rejection email, every ramen dinner, every second-guessing moment, and I said, I guess I just wanted to prove that I was worth betting on. The segment aired that Friday. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. We gained 12 new client inquiries within 48 hours. 2 small investor groups reached out. But more than that, something shifted in me. I wasn't chasing respect anymore. I had earned it. 1 install, 1 line of code, 1 yes at a time. That weekend I visited my dad's house. I didn't go inside. I just sat in my car across the street and looked at the window where we'd fought that night. It felt like a lifetime ago. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't looking for an apology. I just needed to see it. Remind myself where this all began. I rolled down the window, let the breeze hit my face, and whispered, "Thank you." Then I drove home, not to a garage but to an apartment with warm light, a desk I didn't have to build from cardboard, and a mattress that didn't come from a donation bin. 6 months after I rebranded the company into Havencore Systems, the pace of life took on a rhythm I had never known before. I was working out of a cramped co-working space in downtown Austin, surrounded by other hopefuls with oversized dreams and half-empty coffee cups. Despite my limited resources, I had started gaining real traction in the artisan software space, offering logistics, shipping, and inventory tools to boutique craft stores. What began as a passion project had turned into a functional product suite, and I could feel something shifting, slowly, steadily, but undeniably. The cold emails that used to get ignored now occasionally got a response. One Friday morning, just as I was sipping my second instant coffee, I received a message with the subject line, "Interested in your platform for retail deployment." I clicked it open, half expecting it to be spam, only to discover it was from the operations director of a regional furniture company called Oakline & Moss. They had 44 stores across 6 states and were still using a software system built in 2007. They were looking for a modern alternative. The email was short, direct, and thrilling. "Can you do a multi-location inventory tracking demo by next Thursday?" My heart pounded. I replied instantly, "Yes, absolutely," and immediately cleared my entire week. For the next 5 days, I barely slept. I rewrote entire sections of code, cleaned up the UI, and simulated an entire sample database for their fictitious stores, warehouses, and shipping points. When I presented the demo, the Zoom call lasted an hour, but their questions stretched into a second. They were engaged, curious, and, most importantly, impressed. The following Monday, I received the official notice of intent. They wanted a custom deployment contract within 90 days. The number at the bottom of the agreement almost made me drop my phone. The first contract was for $680,000. With $210,000 paid up front and the remaining balance over milestones. That moment felt like someone had pulled back a curtain I never even realized existed. I sat in stunned silence, staring at the wire confirmation when it hit my account. After years of scraping by on cup noodles and hope, I had crossed the financial line I once only dared to dream about with my newfound capital. I made the first investment that truly signified freedom. I purchased a 3-story luxury villa on the outskirts of Beverly Hills for $28 million. It wasn't a flex, it was a message to myself. The house had wide-open spaces with floor-to-ceiling glass, minimalist interiors, a lap pool, and an unobstructed view of the Los Angeles skyline. But beyond the architecture, it stood as a monument to the version of me who never gave up. No more shared walls or creaky floors. I could walk barefoot across imported Italian tiles and feel the warmth of ownership in every step. My name was etched into the property deed, not shared or borrowed or inherited, but mine. I moved in quietly, no social media posts, no announcement. Just me, a leather chair by the window, and my laptop open to the next feature update of Havencore. In the privacy of that space, I allowed myself a rare moment to feel the magnitude of how far I had come. From sleeping on a secondhand mattress in a 450-square-foot apartment to reviewing specs in my private office, overlooking the Pacific. After the Oakline contract, referrals began to pour in like rain after a drought. A luxury stationery brand called Inconform signed a licensing agreement for $470,000. And a wine cooperative in Napa asked for a custom logistics dashboard. But the breakthrough came when a high-end homeware chain, Hearth and Alabaster, requested a full-service supply chain solution. I flew to New York for the pitch. It was my first time wearing a custom-tailored blazer, one I had ordered quietly from a boutique in Santa Monica. The meeting took place on the 31st floor of a glass building in Manhattan, overlooking Central Park. The boardroom was intimidating. Leather chairs, polished oak, executives who wore expensive silence like a badge. But when I connected my laptop and walked them through the real-time analytics dashboard, their expressions shifted from skepticism to surprise. By the end of the meeting, the CFO leaned forward and asked, "How soon can you start?" I walked out of that building with a signed agreement worth $1.2 million. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just found a quiet spot in Bryant Park, sat on a bench, and let the wind wrap around me like an old friend. With each contract, my confidence grew, not just in business but in myself. I wasn't merely surviving anymore. I was setting terms, creating timelines and building systems that had the power to shape entire operations. I had 6 full-time engineers, 2 UX consultants, and a rotating team of contract developers. My second office opened in San Diego, and by the end of the third fiscal year, we had grossed $4.8 million in revenue. Our net margins sat comfortably at 28%, and we had a runway that extended 22 months into the future. I began to attend conferences, not just as a visitor but as a speaker. I stood in front of rooms filled with venture capitalists and seasoned operators and explained why mid-market artisan businesses were the most underserved sector in the American economy. Most nodded. A few approached after offering investment. I turned down the first 4 offers, but by the 5th, a term sheet valuing Havencore at $33 million, I paused. It wasn't just the number, it was the validation. I negotiated a minority equity deal that brought in strategic funding without ceding control. I remember returning to the villa that night, dropping my keys on the stone counter, and looking around at the space I had curated, piece by piece. I had a brass lamp from a sustainable design studio in Oregon, custom shelves built by a carpenter I had once helped sell online, and a painting from a local artist I had supported during my early bootstrapping days. Everything in the house told a story, not of wealth, but of intention. I was no longer invisible. I didn't need permission to speak or belong. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing approval. I was building legacy, and it hit me. Maybe that's what true success is. Not the number in your bank account, but the fact that you can now help others without needing to ask anyone's permission first. I began to quietly support other entrepreneurs, especially those who, like me, never followed the traditional path. I partnered with a nonprofit incubator and launched a microfunding grant for founders under 25 who had skipped college to pursue meaningful ideas. We gave out $10,000, $25,000 grants in the first 6 months, and I personally mentored 3 of them. One of them, an 18-year-old from Kansas building a drone mapping solution for farmland logistics, reminded me of myself at that age. She had passion, grit, and no one in her corner until now. Seeing her eyes light up as we optimized her product, roadmap was more rewarding than any signed check. And yet, as high as I had climbed, the past still tugged at me like a frayed thread in the back of my mind. I hadn't spoken to my father since the day he told me to leave. He still thought I was just figuring things out in tech, probably imagining me assembling computers in a small garage, barely scraping by. My mother sent the occasional birthday text, always cold, always followed by a picture of my sister and her newborns. But neither of them knew I was the invisible hand funding the mortgage on the family home through a shell trust. They didn't know the medication my mother was on came from a policy I underwrote anonymously, and I liked it that way. Quiet support. Without confrontation, I didn't need their validation to keep doing what I knew was right. At least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew there was a reckoning coming. The day I'd finally pulled back the curtain, not to boast or seek revenge, but to reclaim the story of my life from the people who once tried to erase it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth, and I wanted it to be undeniable, because when your life changes by millions, so does your silence. You begin to realize that silence isn't humility, it's permission, and I had spent enough years granting it. That reckoning was coming soon. I could feel it. The morning I decided to return home wasn't dramatic. I didn't wake up in a fit of rage or stand in front of the mirror psyching myself up. It came like a whisper, soft but persistent, the kind of thought that nudges you for days until you finally listen. I was standing in my kitchen pouring coffee into a handcrafted ceramic mug I'd picked up at a local gallery when my phone buzzed. It was a simple text from my sister. "Dad's turning 60 next week. Thought you should know. there's a thing at the house." Just like that, the universe dropped the invitation I had never expected and never asked for. I stared at the message for a while, then turned my phone face down and stared out at the view, those endless hills, the glassy skyline, the serenity I had paid millions for. Yet even here in my fortress of calm, my chest felt heavy. I didn't owe them anything. Not an explanation, not an appearance. But the thought wouldn't leave me alone. Maybe it wasn't about owing them. Maybe it was about reclaiming the part of myself I left behind in that house when I walked out with nothing but a duffel bag and a bruised heart. So, I went. I didn't roll up in a sports car or bring an entourage. I arrived in a quiet black SUV, wearing a clean linen shirt and sneakers. No need to play dress-up for the people who thought I wouldn't make it past my 20s. The house looked the same, down to the fading paint and the cracked walkway stones. My dad's truck was still parked in the same crooked way he'd always done, half on the lawn, like he owned gravity itself. Inside, the living room was filled with aging relatives, neighbors, and childhood friends I barely recognized. My sister spotted me first. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look surprised, just uncertain. Like she couldn't tell if this was real or some elaborate prank. She walked over and hugged me cautiously, whispering, "I didn't think you'd actually come." I nodded and smiled, unsure what to say. Then I saw him. My father stood by the patio doors, sipping something from a styrofoam cup. His hair had gone fully gray, his shoulders more stooped than I remembered, but his presence still filled the room like an echo of old thunder. He turned and spotted me. For a moment, his face didn't move. No shock, no anger, no warmth, just stillness. Then he nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and turned back to the garden. That was his way of saying hello. Some people say more with silence than with 1,000 words. Later, when most of the guests had drifted to the backyard for barbecue and beer, I found myself sitting on the old floral couch in the den, the same one I'd sat on as a kid, trying. When he walked in and shut the door behind him, no ceremony, no warning, just the two of us in the room where everything began and fell apart. "You came," he said finally, his voice hoarse but steady. "I did." He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "Didn't expect to see you. Thought you'd forgotten all about us now that you're living some big-shot tech life." I looked up at him. I didn't forget. I just stopped trying to prove myself to people who never wanted to see me. That landed like a punch. He looked away, jaw tightening. "You think I didn't want to see you succeed? I think you didn't believe I could. Not without doing it your way." He exhaled, long and slow, then dropped into the armchair across from me. "You were always stubborn, and you were always right, huh?" For a moment the silence returned, heavy, awkward. Then, unexpectedly, he chuckled. "Guess we both got that from each other." There it was. A crack in the wall. I didn't need an apology, signed some big contracts, made some deals. "The house I live in, it's in Beverly Hills." He nodded, unsure if I was exaggerating. "It's worth $28 million, I added, paid for in cash. He looked at me, this time, really looked like he was trying to read a stranger's biography on my face. "You're serious? Dead serious? My company did over $4.8 million in revenue last year, and we're expanding." He shook his head slowly. "You're telling me? You, the same kid I kicked out for chasing some code-writing fantasy? You're the one who built all that." "I'm not the same kid," I said flatly. "But yeah, that's me." His mouth opened slightly, as if a rebuttal was on its way, but it never came. Instead, he sighed, deep and gravelly, like he was exhaling years of disbelief all at once. "I was wrong. I thought you were going to ruin your life. Figured you'd come crawling back needing help. I didn't think you'd make it out there." I nodded. "I know." He stared at the carpet, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "Why didn't you tell us? Your mom's been wondering what you've been up to all these years. She thinks you're some kind of freelance tech helper. Now, I want you to know that I didn't need your approval to make it, but I'm here because a part of me still wanted you to see me, the real me." His eyes shimmered slightly, but he blinked the moisture away. "Well," he muttered, "I see you now." And in that moment, the anger I had carried for so long started to unravel, not vanish, not disappear, but loosen. Like a knot I'd stopped yanking on. I didn't need him to say sorry. His disbelief turning to awe was enough. The moment wasn't perfect, but it was honest. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about the business, how I'd started it, the early failures, the big wins. He asked questions, actually listened, and even offered a few awkward but genuine compliments. When I left that day, we shook hands. Not the warmest of gestures, but for us it was monumental back in my villa. I sat by the fire pit that night, laptop open beside me, and stared into the city lights below. I wasn't the kid from that small town anymore. I wasn't the disappointment, the dropout, the black sheep. I was the architect of my life, and now, finally, even my father knew it. Success isn't just about what you build. Sometimes it's about what you rebuild, even if it starts with a whispered text, a faded photo album, and a nod from the man who once told you to leave. 3 months after the day I stood face to face with the man who once kicked me out, I sat alone in my Beverly Hills office, staring at a blank screen. My villa, usually humming with low music and soft light, was still and silent. Not even the buzz of emails or the flicker of Slack messages interrupted the calm. Outside, the sun had just dipped beneath the skyline, casting a copper hue across the marble floors. But my mind was far from the present. It was dancing between past and future, between the younger me who used to dream of having a seat at the table, and the current me, who now owned the damn table and the room it sat in. I had spent so long proving myself to others, clients, investors, mentors, my father, that somewhere along the way I forgot to ask myself what I really wanted. Yes, I had wealth. Yes, I had power. Yes, I had the house, the influence, the multi-million-dollar brand. But I didn't feel finished. Not yet, because I had this feeling, a quiet, persistent whisper that kept returning at night when everything else grew still. It wasn't ambition or pressure. It was something deeper, a tug, a purpose that hadn't been fulfilled, not in the form of success, but of significance. So I opened a new document, and at the top, I typed, "Legacy doesn't begin when you die. It begins the moment you start living for something greater than yourself." That was the line. The seed dot, and over the next 2 weeks, that line became the foundation of something bigger, the Haven Initiative. A funding and mentorship platform for young people shut out of traditional paths, not a charity. A catalyst. I was tired of hearing stories about kids being told they weren't cut out for college, or that dreams didn't pay bills. I wanted to create the kind of support system I never had, a place where misfits with vision could get what they needed: capital, coaching, and confidence. I invested $5 million into the initiative right off the bat. No venture partners, no board approvals, just my name, my money, and my mission. The applications opened on a Tuesday. By Friday, we had 3,200 submissions. Some were from kids building apps in their bedrooms. Others came from single mothers running online shops out of their kitchens. One came from a 17-year-old who taught herself cybersecurity and wanted to launch a digital safety tool for low-income neighborhoods. As I read through those stories, I saw glimpses of myself, not just in the hustle, but in the loneliness, the hunger, the quiet desperation behind every pitch that screamed, "I just need someone to believe in me." So I did. We funded the first cohort of 20 founders within a month. Each received $50,000 and access to a 3-month accelerator program I designed myself. 1 part business development, 1 part mindset coaching, and 1 part network exposure. I personally hosted the Saturday sessions where we didn't just talk about revenue or tech stacks. We talked about betrayal, burnout, imposter syndrome, family guilt, the real stuff no one puts in pitch decks. One evening, after a particularly intense call where one of the founders broke down talking about being kicked out by their own parents, I logged off and just sat still. My chest ached, not from sadness, but from resonance. I had been that kid, and now I was the person reaching back with a lifeline. The circle had come full dot around that time. Media started picking up the story. Former outcast builds $28 million empire, now funds misfits. Daughter disowned for dropping out now runs one of tech's quietest empires. Headlines poured in. Podcasts called magazines asked for photo shoots. I declined most of them. This wasn't about fame. It was about finishing the story right. But one interview stood out. A woman named Alina, a journalist from a long-form digital mag, requested a sit-down, not in a studio, not on Zoom, but at the villa. She said she didn't want to talk about money or growth. She wanted to talk about what it cost me to win. That phrase stuck with me, so I agreed. We sat outside by the infinity pool at sunset. She didn't bring lights or assistants, just a recorder and a notepad. "Your father once told you to leave and figure it out on your own," she said softly. "What do you think he would say now if he could see all of this?" I looked around at the sky turning gold, at the house I built, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. "He doesn't need to say anything," I replied. "I brought him here last month. He sat in that chair right over there, looked around in silence, then said, 'You really did it, huh? That was enough.'" Alina smiled. "What does doing it mean to you now?" I paused. Let the question breathe. "It used to mean freedom," I answered. "Then it meant revenge. But now it means responsibility. The ability to change someone else's story just because I survived my own." That quote became the headline of the article. A week after it was published, my inbox overflowed with letters. One stood out. It was from a 21-year-old girl named Liza. Her dad had kicked her out for refusing to marry a man twice her age. She ran away, slept on a friend's couch, and started teaching herself graphic design on a secondhand Chromebook. She attached a screenshot of a t-shirt shop she'd built, featuring empowering quotes for girls in restrictive cultures. She ended the email with, "I never knew someone like me could end up like someone like you. Thank you for proving it's possible." I cried, reading that one. In that moment, I realized something. Money builds houses, but purpose builds homes. And I had finally built mine, not with concrete or glass, but with grit, forgiveness, and the belief that no past is permanent. The last thing I did that year was change the name on the villa's entrance plaque. It no longer read just Havencore. I added a second line beneath it. Ruby Lawson, founder, survivor, builder of bridges, because legacy isn't built in the boardroom. It's built in the cracks between rejection and resilience, between what the world says you are and who you decide to become, and sometimes, the most powerful thing you can ever do is turn the door someone slammed in your face into a gateway for someone else. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more of these stories.